You have to do the little got it motion. I am sure that we will continue to have more people hop on. So bear with us. But in the meantime, just wanted to kind of give you guys a little overview of what we're doing today. We are going to be going over buyer consultations. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. I actually started my business as a buyer's agent. I was at a large firm where everyone kind of had their own role. Buyer agents and listing agents were designated and separated. And so coming into the brokerage, this was something they were very passionate about. It was something that in order to get turned on to lead rotation and things like that, we actually had to do a sample buyer consultation with 5 other agents and have them sign off on it, and then do 5 practice rounds with friends or family, which was kind of a big ask because they're not the shortest. But I say all of that to say that practicing things like this, as cheesy as it sounds, as much as we hate to do it, there's never a fun time to do it. It really and truly will help us streamline the way we have conversations with buyers, right? There's never one size fits all. Sometimes we're going to be sitting in an office with someone. Sometimes we're going to be doing this in a house at the kitchen table. There's no one way, but the more we can get used to looking at this information and presenting it in a way that covers all of our bases, then the more we can rest in peace knowing that our buyers are taken care of and that they understand this process. I think my whole goal as an agent is to make sure that people understand what we're getting into and that all of their questions are answered. And so even if I found out that, yes, they have seen a few homes with another agent, yes, they've talked about this process, I am not going to make any representation or any assumptions on what I think that other agent has said. I'm going to be making sure that I say everything because this is a large decision. They have deposits that are at risk, and I want to make sure that they have heard from me what each step of this process entails. So I'm going to go through my version of a buyer consultation today. Obviously, like I said before, kind of tweak it to make it work for you. I will say this one is a little bit hard to do on the computer just because I am going to jump around a good bit. So bear with me. Let me know if at any point I'm referencing something that you can't see, or if you have any questions, feel free to kind of do the hand raise icon, or honestly, just kind of jump right in because sometimes when I'm going back and forth between screens, it's a little bit difficult to see what's going on in the chat and I don't want to miss anything. So you guys just let me know. Now, a few things real quick. I know I use the term scripts a lot. It's something that I'm passionate about. I know I just referenced everything that I used to do at the other firm, but getting in practice of having conversation with people, as cheesy as it sounds, can really make you sound efficient when you're in front of people. And this is something that came from past backgrounds. When I was on Shark Tank, leading up to that, I literally would sit down with my business partner and we had a Google document with every single question we'd ever heard a given shark ask, broke it down into category, and then answered it. And when we were riding around in the car with one another, we'd ask each other these questions and the other person would answer, so that we'd get in the practice of answering in an efficient way that got to the point, but also covered the bases that we needed it to. And so I say all of that to say that get in this routine, but don't be afraid to listen to this recording back in your car. I'm a big like sponge type of person. I need to hear the same thing a number of times before it kind of sinks in with me. And so if that's how you process things, then make a practice of, as you're going to showings, just listen to this back, or as you're on your way to appointments, practicing how you have this conversation with people, or pull your loved one aside and be like, look, I need to practice this. Will you sit down and have a buyer consultation with me, right? And the hard reality of that is those are actually going to be the people that give you the best feedback because they know you personally and they know how well you can do things. Whereas a buyer or some other client that's in front of you, they won't know one way or another. And so 9 times out of 10, those are going to be the best situations we can put ourselves in because they're going to be actively giving us feedback. So I'll jump in, but just kind of keep all of that in mind. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Like I said, we're jumping around a good bit, so hang in there with me. We're talking about buyer consultations today. Typically, if at all possible, I will try to do my buyer consultations in person. Depending on how I acquired the lead, we talked about this last class, depending on how I acquired the lead will a lot of times dictate how much confidence I feel in terms of when I can get in front of them again. So if it's some internet lead or something like that, sure, I might show them a home up front and then say, all right, let's hop on over. Next appointment, let's sit down at my office real quick. I want to make sure that we go over the process, that any of your questions are answered, and that you fully understand everything that goes into this process. But if this is someone that I've been calling, this is a good friend of mine, someone that I know, I might say, hey, you're a little further out in your home search process. I know it sounds crazy. I've got you set up on a search. We're going to use that as kind of a benchmark for what's going on with the inventory and what you can expect when that time does come. But I think it's never too soon for us to be on the same page in terms of what goes into this process, so that the more we can get used to having this conversation, the less intimidating it will be when the time does come. So if that's the case, then I'll likely sit down at my office with them. But if they are relocation clients or something of that sort, we'll do this over Zoom. So typically what I'll do in person is I'll bring a packet with me. We've got those choice folders that have our nice logo on the front. And in that, I'll kind of open it up. I'll slide it in front of my client and say, okay, so we're going to go through a lot of stuff today. In this packet is a number of resources that I've provided to you. On the left-hand side are a copy of some documents that you'll expect to see throughout the process. And on the right-hand side are some resources that I've created for you. So we're going to go over all of that today. Now, time out real quick. In this class, I'm going to jump back and forth kind of between scripting and talking to you guys. But, typically in my past experience, what I've always done is started with their criteria and kind of gone through what it is that they're looking for. And in my mind, making a note of how realistic that criteria is, likely then using that information as a benchmark for what I might discuss when we're talking about each step. But Brian made a good point in referencing how he's done his buyer consultations, which is that, a lot of times people get a little bit bored, understandably. And so he likes to start with the paperwork and then go into the process and then go into their criteria, because the criteria is going to keep them engaged at the end, whereas paperwork might not necessarily. So I'm going to do it his way, but just know that that's how I've done it in the past as well. So there's no one size fits all. So typically what I'll do is I'll lay that out in front of them. And if that's the case, I'll say, why don't we just go over the boring stuff first? These are documents that you're going to expect to see throughout the process. We'll go over it with you right now, but once you go to sign it, we'll go through it all together more in depth. But we'll jump into those real quick, and then we'll circle back and talk about the process. So at that point, I will pull out the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. I will pull out buyer agency. I will also bring with me a copy of the sample contract, and then I'll also go over the professional services disclosure and possibly the inspections Q&A. So let's just do that together right now. And I know you guys know these documents, but I'm just going to say all of this so that you have an idea of how I go over them with clients when they're in front of me. You do it however you see fit. So this is our Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. This is a form provided by the commission. I know it looks kind of like a contract. It looks nice and boring, but it is technically a brochure. Basically, us as agents are required to give this to you by the Real Estate Commission. In essence, there are a number of ways that we can work with you as a client, and we want to make sure that you understand what all of those options are. In North Carolina, there is buyer agency exclusive, which means I only represent you always and forever. And then there are options called dual agency and designated dual agency. Now, when we're talking about hiring me as your agent, in reality, you're actually hiring my firm. And so when we're talking about dual agency, there are those situations where if I represented a seller and you were interested in that home, then I could represent both of you. Or if there was a house that you were interested in that was listed by another agent at my firm and you were interested in, I could also represent you in that situation. I currently don't have any listings active in the market, so we don't need to worry about truly dual agency. Now, that said, it is very possible because we have a number of agents at our firm and we do a lot of transactions. We work with a lot of buyers and sellers that you might at some point be interested in a listing that my firm has. That's going to be called designated dual agency. Just know that at any point in this process, I will let you know if there is any potential for a dual agency situation, but 9 times out of 10, there's not. I also am fully committed to you. So if that was the case, if you were interested in a property that I represented the seller of, in that situation, I would likely refer you to one of my friends that is an agent, have them help you through that transaction so that you could really be fully advocated for. But like I said, I don't have any listings. So just know that designated dual agency still means that I fully represent you. That is what I'm here for. I want to make sure everyone is taken care of. And then there's unrepresented buyer, which just means that You won't be hiring me to represent you, which is fine, but I do like a mutual commitment. So this document just says that I've given this to you. Your signature on this doesn't lock you into anything. I'm just going to select all of the different options for ways that we might be working with each other. And then, like I said before, each situation, I'll explain to you if there is any opportunity where some wires might be crossed, but 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. Just go ahead and sign and acknowledge that I've given this to you. Let me hop into our chat real quick. I will be providing a copy of these slides and recording afterwards. Yes. All right, then I'll hop on over to exclusive buyer agency. This is just a copy of the document that hires me to work for you. It lists the different areas that we're going to be shopping for homes, and it talks about when this relationship will begin and end. The thing that I need you to pay attention to here is strictly that I'm here to work for you. My compensation does tend to be paid for by the seller. That'll be in here. I'll normally bring a filled out copy. The most that I'm typically paid is 3%, which is why you see that here. If at any point I'm being paid more than that, I will absolutely let you know. Now, if by some chance a seller is providing compensation that does not cover my costs, then I will let you know. But in this market, it typically is. Now, in those types of situations, what I'm talking about might be a situation where a seller is listing a property for 1.5%, or a new construction company is providing a flat fee of $2,000, things like that. I absolutely am not in the habit of having my buyers pay more than what they need to, but this is my full-time profession. I take this very seriously. So if there is a balance between those two, then I will let you know, and we can decide whether this house is worth it, or we can figure out an option for covering that balance if this truly is the home for you. Take a look at all of this and let me know if you have any questions. But in essence, in North Carolina, until a buyer signs buyer agency, all agents work for the seller. So what I'll do is I'll send all of this over to you after our consultation. And like I said, you can let me know if you have any questions before signing. I keep that part nice and short and sweet. I'm not going to go through and read every single line to them. Next, I am just going to explain our affiliated business disclosure, and just basically tell them that our company has a relationship with the title company, meaning that we have 50% ownership in that. If they use our title company, our company will be compensated. I, as an agent, will not get any compensation from that, but just know that if you do use our title company, the firm will be compensated. I do need you to sign and acknowledge this when the time does come. I'll typically send this to you when we go to write an offer. But this just acknowledges that you know of this relationship, and just know that actually it is of great benefit for you to use them. North Carolina attorneys cover all of the closing. They do all of the title work kind of on their back end. It's not something that we typically see, but title work can be one of the items that can delay a transaction. And so if you use our title company, then it makes it really streamlined in making sure that everything that we need in terms of payoffs and things like that are taken into account and provided in a timely manner. So I'll send that to you when we go to write an offer. And then lastly, let's go over our offer to purchase real quick. Now, I'll make a reference to this as we're going through the buyer packet later, but just know I'm going to go through kind of the meat and potatoes of it real quick, and then we'll circle back to it as we're going through this process. But on the front hand side, now I'll provide a copy of this to you after this conversation as well, so that you can continue to look over it. But I like to do this because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're seeing something for the first time when you go to sign it. And I don't ever want you to feel that way. So let's go through it right now, and then you can let me know as you have questions. So on the front page are just kind of our key terms. You're going to have information on the seller and on the buyer. We're going to select if it's a manufactured home or not, and I'll put the address and all of the geographical information pertaining to the home. Then down below that, you're going to see a list of financial information. On that first line is where we are going to put your purchase price. This is what we are quote unquote offering to purchase the home for. So this very likely will be the purchase price that's listed, or the list price on MLS. If we are in a multiple offer situation, very likely this is going to have to be a number above that list price in order for us to win it. Or if a home has been on the market for a while and it doesn't have any competition and it doesn't have any offers in hand, then maybe we'll have an opportunity to put a purchase price that's below what it is showing for in MLS. We'll kind of evaluate that on a per situation basis. Whatever this number is totally up to you to decide. Then down below that, we have a number of other financial terms. The ones that we're mainly going to pay attention to are those next two lines. One is for a due diligence deposit. One is for what's called an earnest money deposit. Okay, both of these are deposits that you will pay at the time of contract. And I'll talk about those more in just a moment when we're talking about the process. But the thing you need to know is that North Carolina is a quote unquote due diligence state, which means that it is up to you as the buyer to perform any and all inspections and decide whether you're ready to move forward with the process. Technically, the sellers are not obligated to do anything. And then most of these are just other items that you might need in certain situations, but we're mainly going to stick with these up top. Now, both of those deposits are credited to you once you get to closing. So just know that it's not like you're never seeing that money again. It just helps secure the property for you. We'll also select a closing attorney for the property. They are the ones that are going to hold your earnest money. And then down on the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 is where you will see information about due diligence dates and closing dates. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. Now, when you get home, when you have some time, if you are bored, I would recommend taking a look at the top of page 4. This really and truly outlines what comes with each home. So anything like smoke detectors or doorbells, things like that, things are affixed to the home. You can pretty well guarantee that it's going to be coming with it. In terms of appliances that come with the home in North Carolina, that involves the stove, microwave if it's built in, and dishwasher. Your refrigerator, washer, and dryer do not automatically convey. So especially if I know a client is from Florida, like I mentioned on the front end, I'm going to spend a little more time making sure that they know what comes with it, or if they come from some other state, making sure they recognize how this might be different from their state. But go ahead and take a look at all of that. I will also point out when we're in each home things to keep in mind, but in general, things that are kind of formally attached to the home is what will stay with it. So curtain rods will stay, the curtains will not, for example. Another common item, which I don't know if it's on here anymore. This list used to be really long and they've actually consolidated it more recently. But one of the other examples in the past is the mount for the TVs. Like the mounts typically stay, the TV obviously does not. If at any point we want to ask for some additional items, we can ask for them down on the top of page 6. Or top of page 5, excuse me. At the bottom of page 4, we will list any other items that either do not convey or are leased. So if we're touring a property that has a propane tank, or if it has a satellite dish, anything like that, we may put those in the upper areas. You'll see a ton of terms. Please, please, please read through all of this as you have time. But the other important area that we're going to focus on is the bottom of page 6. Anytime we are making an offer, we're going to be telling the sellers what type of financing we plan on getting. And so we will need to put that in our offer, which is why our very next step, like we talked about the last time we chatted, is going to be getting you speaking with a lender. Because in order for us to submit an offer, we need to be pre-approved and we need to put all of that information in here. Going on down, we will also select, once we're going through this, that we have received disclosures from the sellers. I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but as we're going into each home, each seller should be providing us certain disclosures that outline material facts about the property so we can make an educated decision about how confident we feel going into it. And then we'll make representations about how long the sellers have owned the property and HOA information. If they have any fuel tanks, we'll list that in here. If we are asking for any closing costs of any sort, that will also be provided in the contract. It is a little confusing to me, even as an agent, that this isn't on page 1. So just know if we are asking for closing costs and you don't see them on page 1, that's why it's on this later page, page 10. We can also have the opportunity to ask the sellers for a home warranty or not, whatever the case may be, but just know that that's an option. So maybe if we're touring a home that is in good shape, but there are a few items that we might be a little concerned about in terms of age, we might explore the option of a home warranty. And then the last pages will outline any additional addenda that are attached to this contract. And then we'll have our signatures. So that's the short and sweet of it. Like I talked about, I'll send this to you so you can look it over, but we're going to go over the process more in depth now so that you can kind of get a full understanding of what we're working with. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So on the right-hand side are a copy of the documents that
So Kate, can I interrupt you?
Please.
All all the all those forms, are you going through them on your computer? Or are you going through the paper copy?
If I am in front of them, I'm going through the paper copy, and that's a great
Okay.
question. I typically will go in also to my dot loop. Let me see if and do the print off the sample offer to purchase and all of the other sample documents, because then it will have sample written across it, and I know they can't then use it. But yes, I'm going to typically print it out and flip through the pages, but that's just my style. What about you guys? Anyone else want to kind of chime in about those documents that I just went over? Any questions and or how you do it?
Yeah, I do it with the paper copy.
Mhm.
And pretty much a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, just short and sweet, but making sure I hit kind of the main points. You'll always have, I mean, it just depends on the communication style of the client. If you've got one that's super in depth, then they might ask you a million questions, but yeah, awesome. So then I'll typically jump over to my buyer packet. I'm going to go through this just kind of as I have done and pretend like you guys are my buyers. I will provide a copy of this in a Canva link to you guys so you can edit it however you see fit. So if you want to drop in your own bio or your own headshot, feel free. And then, like I said, just stop me at any point. Okay, so I'll typically then say, all right, let's move on over. On the right-hand side are some resources that I've created for you that outline this process as a whole. So we'll go through that real quick. Now, the first page is just information about me and the company. You guys know me. And then I also have some testimonials that I've created or that I've gotten from my clients. Like I said, you guys know me, but the main thing that most of my clients really rave about is the fact that I'm really professional and knowledgeable. And I just want you to know that I take this role very seriously. I absolutely love what I do. But more than that, I want you to know that I recognize that even though I do this every day, this is not an everyday decision for you. And I understand that. And so I see my entire goal here as being a resource to you. I want to make sure all of your questions are answered. I want to make sure you understand this process. And I want you to know that I'm here to advocate for you. I'm here to work on whatever timeline it is that works with you and your family. And any item relating to pricing is totally for you to decide. I will always give you my best advice on what I think it might take to win it, both in terms of urgency level and competition in terms and pricing, but that's always up to you. And so just know at any point, if you feel rushed or if you feel like I'm giving you advice on things that are too high, just know that that's my advice based on the market, but it's always up to you to decide. Okay. So let's talk about the process. Step one, great job. We'll check it on off. We're right here. We're going to start this process with a buyer consultation. Like I said, I'm going to talk about the process. I'm going to go over what's involved. We'll talk about the financial terms and those deposits that I mentioned and what's at risk. We'll talk about what happens once you're under contract and through on to closing, but don't worry, our relationship doesn't end there. I really pride myself on building relationships with all of my clients beyond closing, but we start right here. Today, we're going to talk about all of that. We'll talk about getting your search started, and then we'll go through all of that. Now, we'll kind of circle back to your criteria at the end, but just know that once we have that criteria, I'm going to set you up on a few searches and timeout. Agents, do this however you see fit. I know some people are really firm on saying, I only set my clients up on an MLS search, or I only set them up on my website. Do whatever works for you. I never had kind of a one size fits all that I was really passionate about. And so I would typically set my clients up on 2 searches. So that's what I'm going to do here today. So I typically say, as I get your criteria, I'm going to set you up on a few searches. I'm going to set you up on one through MLS. I'm going to set you up through another on my website. Now, the benefit of having a search set up through MLS is that it is pulling immediate information. So anytime a house is either listed or coming soon, as soon as it hits MLS, we will be in the know. So as your search becomes more serious, then I'm absolutely going to want us to have you on the MLS search. But if you're a little ways out, I'm also going to have you on my website search. The benefit of this is it's very similar to some of the other sites that you've browsed through, like Zillow and Realtor.com. So it's very user friendly. And the other benefit is I can see favorites and things like that as you fit them. Now, the thing to know is both of these searches are designed to make sure that we cover all of our bases and that we don't miss anything. And I want you to browse however you're most comfortable. I don't want to flood your inbox. So once you've gotten a few emails from these, Let me know which of the two you prefer, and I'll go ahead and I'll pause the other. My thought would be we'll likely stick with the MLS search just because it's going to have more options immediately. But it's totally up to you. You let me know which of the two you prefer. I don't want to flood your inbox. But our goal with this in doing online searches and e-alerts is to cast a broad net and make sure we don't miss anything. And so I'm going to keep that criteria nice and broad. The other reason I'm going to do this is because online criteria is solely based off of the input information that a listing agent has provided. There's some fields that are required, like bedrooms and bathrooms and square footage, but there's other fields that are completely optional. These are going to be things like granite countertops or fenced yard. And so if I add filtered criteria based on that, we could totally be missing out on a property based on a listing agent who just wasn't on top of it enough to add that information, or maybe they put it in too quickly and didn't provide that. And I don't want us to miss out on things. So we use this as kind of our broad net. I'd much rather you say no to something than for us to feel like we missed out on it altogether and have you reach out to me a few weeks later and say, how did we not see this one? Okay. Just know I will also be going through MLS daily and sending you hand selected options. Real quick, how do you prefer to be communicated with? If I see the perfect property, do you want me to call, text, or email you? And I always do that because it helps us get on the same page. I will say, if at all possible, I recommend that you text me if there's a property that you're interested in. Just because if you favorite something online, I don't always get that notification immediately, and I don't want us to miss out on anything, especially if it just hit the market. Any questions about any of that so far, you guys? I typically will also throw in here when I'm talking about this stuff, I'll start to set some expectations of how I work with my clients. One thing I want you guys to know, I'm a full-time real estate professional. I take my job very seriously, which means that I'm going to be doing showings. Most of the time, I will be working between 9 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. I will do showings during those times. I prefer that you give me as much notice as possible. I do occasionally do showings on Saturday, but it's on a first come first served basis, and I need advance notice for that. I do not do showings on Sundays, so please plan accordingly. That said, I also recommend that you feel free to call or text me when you're thinking of something, but just know that those are my hours. And so if you text me outside of that, if it's something that's non-urgent, then I will respond to you the next business day. The way that this is sustainable to me and is exciting to me is by being fully present with you when we are together and when I'm focused on your home search. But that also means that I am fully present for my family and loved ones when I am not on. And so if you have any questions about a property or you want to schedule a showing, if it's after 6:30, by all means, feel free to text me, but just know I'll likely respond first thing in the morning. If we have an offer out though, I absolutely will be having my phone on me, right? Like find your script for that, whatever feels natural to you. I probably would normally do it kind of up in this section. I would likely recommend even putting your hours on your About Me page and just setting those boundaries with your clients of what is urgent, right? Like, and if you text me a property, please let me know what it is that you're inquiring about. Would you like to see it? Do you have a question about how it's priced? Do you have a question about the property as a whole? Like, let me know. I say that because we've all had those clients that just text you an address, right? And you're like, okay, like, what though? What do you want, right? You don't want to say, okay, what about it? But you kind of think that. So just set that expectation when you're going over this. All right. Our next step though is to secure financing. Typically, I don't know what I did with this, but I also had a little printout that was kind of a circle. And so I would have like step 1, step 2, step 3, and onward. And my step 2 was getting financing. And so it was very easy for me to point to that and say, okay, this is our next step. But same thing goes here, right? This is our next step, really and truly, is to secure financing. Financing is the biggest part of this home purchase. And I want to make sure that you're protected. We have a number of deposits that are going to be at risk once you go under contract. And so the more we can prepare on the front end, then the more comfortable and confident we can feel moving forward. A lender is going to help you go through they're going to ask for a ton of financial documents. They're going to pull your credit. They're going to talk about your monthly income and expenses. And then using all of that, they're going to go ahead and figure out what we are qualified for. This is where, as an agent, we're going to make sure that we make note of, do they rent or do they own? If they own, I'm also going to talk about contingencies and what that timeline looks like for us. in this case, I'm going to be assuming that they're first-time buyers. They'll say, your lender is going to work with you on making sure that we have this approval lined up for your lease expiration. I know that you mentioned that expires in May, and that you need to move out. So we really and truly need to get on it. We need to start searching ASAP. So on that note, let's talk about what it takes financially to buy a house. I know we talked a little bit about it when we were going through the contract, but the thing that I want you to know is there's 3 main times that we're going to be taking cash out of our pocket for this process and transaction. The first time is when we go under contract. Now, I want you to know that when we are simply writing an offer, these deposits are not due. So don't worry. Every time you're interested in a house does not mean that we're writing checks or pulling money out of the bank. It is only if your offer is accepted that money is due. So we are simply, at the time that our offer is being written, we're simply telling the sellers what that amount would be. So once our offer is accepted and we get signatures from the sellers, then we are under contract officially. And at that time, we have 2 deposits that are due. One is called due diligence and one is called earnest money. Okay. Due diligence, or I guess let's back up. Earnest money is just more skin in the game. The entire time that you're under contract is typically around 30 to 45 days. The shorter we can get with that time, the more competitive our offer tends to be with the sellers. So earnest money is a deposit that basically shows them that we are committed to the closing process throughout the entire process. Due diligence is both a time period and an amount that we pay. So due diligence is normally about 2.5 to 3 weeks. It's the amount of time at the front end of our contract. So as soon as our offer is accepted, our due diligence will begin. We will set the amount of time that due diligence is. So you and I will work together to determine what date falls within that 2 to 2.5 to 3 week time period that makes sense. That will be just enough time for us to get our inspections completed and get our appraisal done. We will then negotiate based on our findings. Earnest money covers that latter half. If we were to walk away, 9 times out of 10, we're going to walk away during due diligence. We'll talk about due diligence more in depth in just a moment. But if we walk away from our contract at any point, the seller keeps that money. If we walk away after due diligence, then the seller keeps both deposits. But most of the time we would walk away during due diligence. So earnest money covers that second half of the contract process. These are typically around 1 to 2% of the purchase price, but these are amounts that you completely decide. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. Once you are under contract, though, you will have a number of inspections that are due. The main or the most common ones are going to be your home, your pest, and your radon inspection. Those are going to be variable amounts, but typically your home inspection is going to be about $400 to $600. Your pest inspection and your radon inspection typically are around $100 to $150 each. You also can get a survey while you are under contract. I would highly recommend that as your agent. Those are typically around $400 to $600. And then you will also have to order your appraisal while you're under contract. And that's typically around $500 to $700. All of these items are due at the time that you order them, except for surveys. Surveys can typically be paid at closing, but everything else that you see right here is paid in advance. The time that you order it is the time that you pay for it. You do not get this money back. This is not money that's truly a part of the contract. It's paid to third parties. Due diligence and earnest money you do get back at the end as long as you make it to closing. So on that note, the third time that you're going to have money paid out is at closing. The amount of cash that you bring to closing is made up of 2 main amounts. One is your down payment. This is going to be a percentage of your loan amount. So if you're getting a conventional loan, this is in your first time buyer, this might be 5% down. Whatever your percentage is that your lender is telling you is your down payment. That's what we're talking about here. And then you're going to have, in addition to that, your closing costs. Closing costs are going to be things like attorney fees, lender fees, tax and insurance prorations, and other little miscellaneous charges, which will all be outlined in our closing disclosure. We will then take those 2 amounts and combine them, and we will then subtract any deposits that we have already put into the contract. So we will then subtract these 2 deposits that we put in, and we will have a balance of our cash to close. Now, if by some chance we have negotiated some repairs from our sellers and they're going to give us cash instead of repairs, then that will also be deducted from our cash to closing. So let's talk about this for just a moment, because I know
Hey,
we
Kate.
talked about, yeah.
Hey there, quick question on the survey. If it's a new construction community, is it still required? I've heard both sides. And I'm not sure. So if it's brand spanking new, I know the plat map, everything's all set. So
It can be a little tricky. Typically, I would just ask the builder and say, I know you guys have plat maps that are provided, but will you also be providing a survey?
okay,
Because some builders automatically provide them for a discounted rate, but you have to buy them. Like if they provide it, they have to pay that amount. Now, normally, instead of the survey costing $500 or $700, the survey might cost $300 or $500. So it's a discounted rate, but ask them that, and then ask them if it's not required or not provided automatically, do we have the option to buy it from you as the builder?
okay,
And see what they say. And then if not, you can still have one ordered. But I mean, I would still get one for new construction, just because, you know, a seller's only job is to provide clean and clear title. And the builder is always going to protect themselves. So they might not know something is off, you know, but if there's like an easement or encroachment or something like that, you might want to have it. And just from past experience, a plat map won't always show things like a sidewalk or like a light post or something, you
Okay.
know,
sure.
but it's up to them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions so far, you guys? All right, cool. Now, typically when I'm going over the next few pages, talking about due diligence, I will pull this page kind of off to the side. I spent a little bit of time talking about this on the front end, but typically I honestly will kind of pull it to the side and go over it as I'm going through these other two pages. So we talked about a lot. I know that seems really intimidating. You're probably a little overwhelmed already. Fret not. We're going to keep talking about this stuff. It'll be a lot less intimidating as we continue to kind of break it down. But like we talked about, we've got three main terms when we go to write an offer. Those are going to be those three terms that we saw on the front page of our offer to purchase. It's going to be your purchase price, our due diligence, and our earnest money. Purchase price is exactly what you would think. The higher that number, the better for the seller. That is our number one term always, no matter what the situation. The higher our price, the better that offer is to the seller. You and I will talk together on a per situation basis to decide what that number should be and what makes sense based on your budget. Like I said before, always going to provide advice. It's totally up to you to decide how to take that advice and what to do to move forward. Now, due diligence and earnest money. This is the scary part, understandably. These are two deposits that are due at the time of contract. That one is completely non-refundable, one is slightly refundable. Okay, let's talk about due diligence for a moment, because that's where it's most intimidating. This is how our contract differs from most states. So we're going to make a habit of continuing to talk about this. I want you to know that each house we go into, I'm going to make a habit of telling you what I think it would take to win it in terms of purchase price. And I'm going to talk about what deposits might look like for a given house based on what we're about to talk about. Because I need you to know it's going to be overwhelming when the time comes, but the more we can get used to having this conversation and seeing what these deposits would look like in different situations, then the more confident you can feel about it. So due diligence, like we said, is both a time period and an amount. It is a time that you are paying for. It is an amount that goes directly to the seller. As soon as you write that check, as soon as your offer is accepted, you're writing two checks. Due diligence is held by the seller and they cash it immediately. It is the amount of time that we're paying for to explore that we are ready to move forward. In essence, we're going to be doing our inspections and our appraisal during that time. We can order as many inspections as you like. Like I just talked about, there's three main ones that I recommend. But if there's anything else that kind of catches our eye, we can absolutely order those as additional inspections. Those might be things like a roof, foundation, or HVAC inspection. I'm not in the habit of costing you more than what you need to though. So we can do this on a per situation basis. If something really looks like it might need a little work, then we can absolutely order it on the front end. But most of the time, we'll just stick with our typical home inspection. And then if anything comes up on that, we can order an additional inspection to cover those bases. But the thing that I need us to keep in mind here is that our inspections are for our knowledge as buyers only, really, because sellers in North Carolina, according to our contract, are not required to do anything. According to our contract, every home in North Carolina is sold as is. So it doesn't matter if the inspection is terrible or if it's great, whatever the case may be, that is kind of our note to do once we close. Now we can always use that as information to go to the sellers though. And so when we get our inspection report back, I'll go through it on my end, you go through it on your end, and then we'll touch base and we'll go over anything that concerns you. I'll go over anything from my own experience that catches my eye, and we'll make a plan, whether that's ordering more inspections or negotiating with the seller. Now, when we get our inspection back, we can use these findings to go to the seller for one of two ways. We can either ask for cash in exchange for the repair, or we can ask for the repair itself. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be my recommendation that we ask for cash in exchange for the repair, because the timeline of it is a lot faster. We can go ahead and wrap it up, and we can't guarantee what the timeline of any given vendor might be. The sellers might be open to the repair, but will the vendor even be able to get in there to perform it before closing? It would really depend on the situation. And in addition, my definition of fixed, your definition of fixed, and the seller's definition of fixed are likely 3 different fixed. And so if there is something that comes back on that inspection, if it's something that you want repaired, we will be very specific about how we outline the need for that repair. We will likely have our vendor make a quote of exactly what needs to take place. Kind of a good example of this is an expansion take on a water heater. Any plumber can come in pretty well and say, yes, that's fixed. They replace it. They can check off that that's working. But a leaking toilet, for example, my definition of fixed and your definition of fixed are likely repairing flooring, possibly replacing drywall, definitely replacing that valve or whatever the case may be. And the seller's definition of fixed very possibly could be just, tightening a bolt. So normally we're going to ask for cash, but we need to know that asking for funds needs to come from an educated place. We need to be basing this off of research that we've done or other vendors that we've had quote us. We don't want to just be throwing numbers out there. And please know that the higher that number is does not give us any more leverage. So we need to be realistic in terms of what we're asking for. The other thing that we're going to make sure takes place during due diligence is our appraisal. Are you familiar with how appraisals affect loan amounts? Most of the time I would, no, I don't know. Maybe tell me, right? So say, okay, so appraisals are kind of a tricky situation. There's something that you as a buyer pay for, but they're truly a third party. Appraisers are hired by the bank to justify that the amount that we are paying for the property is what they as the bank deem the market value to be. So if there is any difference between your appraised value, so your loan amount is based off of appraised value or purchase price, whichever is lower. So if our appraisal comes in at purchase price or above, we're good to go. Everything with our loan is the same as what our lender has told us on the front end. If it does not appraise for the purchase price that we have listed on our contract though, we have what's called an appraisal gap, meaning there's a difference between our appraised value and our purchase price. When that happens, we can go to the sellers and play down and say, hey, you need to drop the price. They might, but they have 3 options. They can either say, yes, I'll drop the price completely. No, I won't drop it at all, or I'll meet you somewhere in the middle. If there's any difference, even if they drop it a little bit, if there's some difference, that's what we call a gap still. And so that is additional funds that you would then need to bring to the closing table if you wanted to make it to closing. So it doesn't matter what our situation is. We can always go to the sellers and request for either inspections or cash in lieu of repairs or an appraisal gap. We can go to them and say, we want X, Y, and Z done, but just know that they have 1 of 3 answers. Either yes, I'll do all of it. No, I won't do any of it, or I'll meet you in the middle. That's kind of the same with repairs. We'll submit repairs to them and telling them what the issues are or what we're asking for that cash to cover. And then they can say either, yes, we'll do all of that. No, we won't do any of it, or we'll meet you in the middle. The thing I need you to know is, like we talked about, it's as is, sellers aren't required to do anything. So it doesn't matter if the home is fallen to the ground from the inspection, or it doesn't appraise, or you just changed your mind. It doesn't matter. We walk away for any reason, the sellers keep those funds. So it can be really intimidating. But this due diligence amount is amount that you completely decide. So we can do it based on your confidence level and how much competition there is. And so if we are going into a property, for example, I went ahead and I pulled up one of the properties that you sent me. So normally, normally going into this, in addition to bringing the contract forms and my reference resource pages, I will also bring an MLS copy of typically a property that they've sent me, like one of the first ones that started our conversation, or one that I've seen them favorite online, something like that. I'll say, here's one of the properties that you sent to me, for example, and I'll pull it up. And then I will also have either that MLS sheet or have it up on MLS, and I will have a copy of the property disclosures with me. So at this point is kind of when I'll jump over and say, but I want you to know, although I'm not an appraiser and although I'm not an inspector, I can give you guidance on how protected or confident we might feel based on the information provided by the seller. So going into a given property, I just referenced that property that you sent me the other day. It's listed for $489. It's been on the market for a ton of days. Likely not competitive, right? In this case, we might do a purchase price of $470. We take into account any reductions they've already done, things like that. At this price, they likely have had a few offers that they might have rejected, but we'll take a look at that. We will then also, though, take a look at what's called the residential property disclosure. So what this is a document that each seller is required to fill out unless it's a foreclosure, in which case they outline all material facts about the property and whether there are any issues with them. They can go through and say either, yes, there is an issue, no, there is not, or no representation. We will also be able to see the age of given items, like the roof and the HVAC. When we're looking at our inspection reports, they're going to be 40 to 60 pages long. It's going to be incredibly intimidating. There's going to be a ton of stuff on there. But let's be real, if you're paying $400 to $600, would you want it to be 2 pages? No, right? But this type of information is going to really help us leverage how confident we feel, because we're not going to go in after our inspection looking at items to negotiate based on like very small wood rot around doors, or caulking on your countertops, or grout or broken tile, things like that. We're going to focus on big ticket items. This is going to be our roof, our HVAC, our foundation, plumbing, and electrical mainly. And so looking at this disclosure can be very helpful to us, because we know that the roof was replaced in 2019. Awesome. The HVAC was replaced 3 years ago. So those are 2 very big ticket systems that are almost brand new. So we can be very confident going forward at this property and knowing that at least those 2 items should be pretty well covered. And the reason we focus on those is because they're so incredibly expensive to either repair or replace. And so if those are covered, any home is going to need a new roof or a new HVAC or a new water heater at some point in its ownership, every single house. It's just a matter of understanding where in that life cycle of the system we fall for each property. So in this case, we can know that those systems are relatively new, and that according to the sellers, everything else is working fine. Now, sellers do have to fill that out based on their best knowledge, but let's also recognize that most sellers are not going into their attic or their crawl space every day. If the lights turn on and the AC and heat are working, it's in good working condition to them. So we still likely will find things that the sellers didn't know about. Doesn't mean they lied. It just means that we have a formal inspector in here and they aren't an inspector. Mr. Sellers aren't. So just know all of that. So in that case, if this home has been sitting on the market for quite a while, we're going to go in likely below list price, and we'll likely do a pretty low deposits. Or we might go in even lower and do very strong deposits, because in that case, we might know that we aren't worried about the appraisal. And those big ticket systems are pretty new, so I'm not worried about those, right? Like that's how we'll kind of have this conversation, and then it's totally up to you to decide how you move forward. In this case, kind of a low due diligence would be something like $2,000 or $3,000. We want to go up, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, it gets a lot of offers. We likely will go up to about 4 for each deposit. But in this case, we can probably go kind of low. Now, just know though, if it's been on the market this long, sellers might not necessarily be as motivated. It could be a situation where they're just waiting for the right offer. So just because it's been on the market forever, it doesn't mean we're going to scoop it up for nothing. We can certainly kind of try. We'll figure it out per house. Now, the same thing goes with the appraisals. I'm not an appraiser, but anytime we go into a property, if it's one that you're interested in, I'm going to run what's called a CMA. This means I'm going to look at this property in comparison to the ones around it, either within that neighborhood or in a 1 mile radius or so, that are active, pending, and sold over the past 6 months, that are comparable in size, age, location, and condition. And I'm going to evaluate those based on the list price and sales price, the number of days on market, whether they had any closing costs, so that I can get an understanding of how this home is priced compared to the others around it. If we're looking at it and the price per square foot is really high for the property that we're in, and the list price is way above, it's $30,000 above everything I've seen in the past 6 months, I'm going to be pretty confident in telling you, I don't know if it will appraise. Or I can look at it and say, man, everything is right in line with everything. It's not the lowest house on the block, but that's okay. We've got a good number of homes around it that are above it in either purchase price or price per square foot. So it could be kind of 50-50. It might appraise, it might not, but we're pretty close, right? The reason I say that is because if it is way overpriced, we might go in at a much lower due diligence amount. Or you and I are going to have a conversation of, I know you love this house, but if it doesn't appraise, what are we going to do about it? Do we have the cash on hand to bridge that gap? Now, that's all that goes into due diligence. When we are in due diligence, you and I are going to be talking like every day or every other day. It's going to feel like a lot. Understandably, we're coordinating vendors, we're meeting at the property for different things. Just know that once we get past due diligence, it's pretty well smooth sailing. The lender and the attorney are just kind of doing what they need to do in order to get things ready for closing. So as we get towards the end of the contract process, fret not. I know after you've been talking every day, then it can feel like you're missing something when we aren't talking as much. Don't worry. No news is good news in that situation. The attorney and the lender are just going to be finalizing their file for us. But then right towards the end, we're going to be ready for closing. You're going to get what's called a clear to close from your lender, meaning that we are ready for closing. It's going to come out of underwriting with either a conditional or an unconditional approval. An unconditional approval means that we are good to go. Everything that we've discussed with our lender, as long as nothing changes financially, we are ready for closing. If we get a conditional approval, it means that we have a few things we need to do, likely a few documents or some explanations we need to provide to the lender in order to get that approval. And then once we're approved, we'll be on to closing. So the lender and the attorney will finalize their numbers. They will communicate to make sure that their numbers match one another. And then they will provide us a copy of those closing documents so that we can take a look at it. You and I will go through that on our end. We will then coordinate our closing or our pre-closing walkthrough, which will be either the evening before or the morning of. And then we'll go to the attorney's office to sign and get you closed. Now, a few things to note real quick in terms of timelines. One, and this is something we'll talk about as we get closer. So don't worry, you won't necessarily remember it, but I want to make sure I've said it before. 3 days before closing at the latest, you will need to receive a preliminary closing disclosure from your lender, basically making sure that you understand how much money we're going to need to bring to closing, because the final numbers for your closing can very likely take place the morning of or the day before. So just know that we will have a little bit of a heads up, and then it will likely be kind of right before closing once those numbers are finalized. And then we'll do a walkthrough, like I said, before closing, just to ensure that the property looks the way that it should, that everything's moved out and that we're ready to go. Now, technically, the sellers don't need to be out of their property until about 9 a.m. the morning of closing, but we can absolutely go the night before, just kind of make sure everything looks the way that it should. I typically recommend that we go the day before, just because if there's anything that needs adjusting, if the sellers have left a bit of stuff behind or anything like that, it's just a lot easier if we have an evening's notice instead of just the morning of. But once you go, you're going to sign. Both of you will bring your licenses. You'll go through everything. You'll sign it on your end. And then once everything has been completed, the attorney will submit it to the lender. The lender will provide their side of the funds. Once all of the funds are received, it will then be submitted to the county. Once it records with the county, it will officially be yours. So just know, I know it can be really exciting, but I want to make sure I've said it, that once we're under contract, be sure if you're setting up movers for the day of closing, make sure you buffer about 3 to 4 hours after closing, so that we make sure that we record, because you likely will not be getting keys at the closing table. It will likely be a few hours afterwards, and there's nothing worse than having movers on the way and realizing, oh, we don't have keys yet. So that's kind of the short and sweet of it. What questions do you guys have for me, and what concerns do you have? And I'll kind of leave it at that. All right, y'all, I've rambled enough. What are your thoughts? What questions do you have? And how do you do it?
Did I miss it, or did you kind of give them a warning? Now, don't go, the lending is the way, the financing is the biggest reason for a deal breaking up. So don't go buy a car, don't go buy furniture. You have to wait till closing is done to do that.
I did not, but you were right. I think it's because I just did the lending class last week, and I'm like, I've said it so much, but yes, absolutely. During that lending conversation, I normally will then also include a copy of a resource that my lender might have created. So I know some lenders will have, or even I might create then like a 10 things to do or not do. I know on that class, the lending class we had last, we kind of finished with those. So see if my lender has something like that, the do's and don'ts, and then if they don't, do it. But yeah, absolutely. In the lending conversation, talk about that.
Yeah, but they are going to say, well, I'm going to need a refrigerator and a washer and a dryer. I have to get that ordered. So,
which is totally understandable, because you also, you're going to need food to eat, and you're going to have a fridge in there, and what's the delivery timeline? Absolutely. It's a good conversation to have, and to just kind of remind them, like, it's a delicate dance because of delivery times these days, but I need you to, any large purchase, touch base with your lender, because we need to make sure we're protecting you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
What else do you do in yours? Do you typically sit down in an office, or do you typically do this at the kitchen table?
I'm typically in person. Yeah, and I will kind of give them a ballpark for closing costs. And I'll say, it's going to be a chunk of money, and you can get maybe a better estimate from your lender, but, estimate, and it depends then on how expensive the house is and everything. But, it could be $5,000, $8,000 of closing costs. So
Absolutely.
That's not part of your down payment. That's additional. And then I also will really emphasize, but you close in, since the mortgage payment is like in arrears, you close in May, you don't have a mortgage payment in June. It will not be till July that you have a mortgage payment. So I'll kind of buffer the shock of the closing cost with that caveat.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, honestly, because I typically, I've been really practicing and trying to do it in reverse and doing the documents first, but I typically will start with the criteria of clients, because in my opinion, exactly to your point, it gives me an understanding of, even if they haven't talked to the lender yet, knowing when does their lease expire? Like, and what does that mean in terms of us searching and needing to be under contract? And like, are we going to cut it close? Or if we buy a little bit in advance, to your point, it's okay, because you actually aren't going to be having like an overlap probably. Or it will give me an indication on how we need to shop, and I'll kind of weave that in when I'm talking about things. Let me kind of go down, because typically I actually didn't even circle back with that, but normally I will then go into so let's talk about your criteria. What is your timeline? Let's talk about that. Like, what's driving the timeline of your search? We'll talk about, have you spoken at all with a lender yet? Oh, you started online. Well, that's a great place to start. Let's get you talking with the local lender though, and I'll kind of go through that whole spiel. If you missed our lending class, touch base on that. But I then will go through and just say, all right, let's break down, like, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms are you thinking? And then I'll explain to them how I'm going to set up their search based on that. So if they're looking for 4 bedrooms, I'm going to explain, okay, wonderful. I'm going to start you on 3 on our search, just because if it's 3 and a bonus, that might work. But if I put in 4 as our minimum, then it will remove any potential 3 bedrooms plus bonus options. And I want to make sure we're not missing anything. I'll kind of pull all of that back. Does anyone want to just give me some sample criteria? We can kind of run through like how we might explain it to a client in terms of setting it up for search.
Sure. So, but usually, like you just said, you talk them down as far as the minimums. But like if they say, okay, like a 1/4 of an acre, I'm like, okay, I understand that, but you don't want to miss out on a house that is 0.23 acres. So I'm always going to go a little bit broader than what you specify, just, because I'm sure if it's right on the edge, right on the bubble there, that you'd still be okay with it. So I'm going to make it a little bit broader. And then also keep in mind that we can always tweak this. If you feel like you're seeing too much of something, we can always tweak your criteria.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I might say, all right, I want to be in, within, sometimes people say like 20 minutes of my work. And then I'll start to say, if they have kids, okay, are schools important to you? Because I could set up a criteria based on schools, or, a county, or try and narrow it down when people say a distance from their work. But so are you asking just for general criteria?
Yeah. Personality.
I find some people only want, newer houses, nothing older than 2015. And then I'll still try and talk them down and say, okay, well, let's broaden it up a little bit and say maybe 2010, that type of thing. So age is really important to some people, because they feel like then nothing's going to need to be repaired in the next couple of years. Say 2010 house, say in Cary, but only like the west side of Cary, and 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and like 0.2 acre lot. I guess that's the main things. Yeah.
Cool. So in that case, exactly like you just said, like, all right, awesome. I will go ahead and I'll get us set up on a search based on that. I will say offhand, looking at your criteria, the age should be something that we should be able to accommodate, just because if we're looking, West Cary is relatively new. I will say though that West Cary does tend to have a lot more townhomes and not as many single family, or if they are single family, they tend to be pretty pricey. So I just want to kind of put a bug in your ear about that. We'll put everything in MLS and see what it shows, but it is very possible that it might come back that the house that you're looking for is significantly above our price point, or it might be a townhouse. If that was the case, would you be at all open to a townhome? And see what they say.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Understandably not. Okay, cool. Well, let's explore some other locations then. When we talk about your location, what's what's pulling you to the West Cary area? And they might say something like you said, I want to be 20 minutes to work. Awesome. Let's get your work address. And why don't we do a radius around that? Now, I understand that some of these areas might not be of interest to you, but because we have a little time in our home search, why don't we just make a goal of, I'm going to do this radius. And as things come up, if it's not in that West Cary area, why don't you just go drive it that evening or that weekend and just see if it's an area that might interest you? And if so, then we can explore it further. But I would rather us say no to something than just miss it altogether just because it's not an area we've explored yet. And that might mean, South Durham, or that might mean, a little more central Cary. We'll take a look at it. Are you open to being a little more rural? Like, would you be open to something in Pittsboro? I'll kind of continue to pull that back. Like you said, if they're talking about age, like if they're looking in the central Cary area, I may say, well, that's going to be a tough one. Most of the homes built in Cary are a little bit older. I'll try to find something based on that. But if needed, would you be open to X, Y, and Z areas? The 0.2 acre lot, anything relating to acreage, I always ask, okay, awesome. Why are you looking for that acreage? Can you explain to me what you're interested in? They might say, oh, we love to garden. And then to your point, Judy, we might say, okay, well, if we end up with a corner lot that's 0.18, that might feel pretty similar to 0.2. So why don't we do it based on that search? And then you guys can just let me know, because we could have the perfect lot that's a 1/4 acre, but if it's pie-shaped into the back, then we'll have a very small backyard and that won't matter either. So we'll kind of use that on a per basis situation. I'm going to take a ton of notes and just really peel that onion. Like we were talking about, just ask a ton of whys. Like, what is your definition of new? I really want a newer house. What is your definition of new? 2010 or newer. Awesome. That seems pretty realistic. Why is that? Like, why do you want a newer home? I don't want to worry about systems. Totally understandable. So if we found you a home if we start looking, we aren't seeing what we need, would you be open to bumping your criteria down to 2000 if we can find you something that has had a roof replacement and an HVAC that's new? Maybe not, but maybe, maybe they say, oh, I don't really like the layouts of those. I want an open concept. Okay, good to know. I'll let you know if I find anything that fits that. We might need to just look for open concepts in general. If you want a 1-story home, are you open to a ranch plus a bonus? We talked about the 4-bedroom thing. If they want a nice kitchen, understanding that I can't really create a criteria based on that. I could do one that says granite or something like that. But again, if the listing agent hasn't put in that information, they only have it in the remarks section, for instance, it's going to be really hard for me to make sure I don't miss. So we'll just do that on a per house basis. And if I see something that fits your needs when I'm searching on MLS, I will absolutely send that to you. We also
agree with you, Kate. Yes, when the more we narrow sometimes the search, then the worse sometimes it gets. Missing opportunities. I had a client that was looking for some room that they will be able to study or treat it as an office. When I put in search office, some properties came up. And then when I put study, entire different bunch of property came out. So it was really tricky, but they both have this opportunity. So that feature.
Right. I mean, you certainly can add a search based on the remarks, but to your point, you don't even know if they'll use study or office. It's hard to know what that verbiage will be, but it's kind of nice to keep it nice and broad, because then you really are helping them find the house. Like if you're keeping that criteria broad, they're getting your e-alerts, but then you're going on MLS and saying, okay, and sending them a hand selected text and saying, hey guys, I saw this house come up today. It has 0.2 acres. It is in West Cary. It is only a 15-minute drive to your office, and it was built in 2014. So nice and new, comparatively speaking. I also was able to see, it looks like they have some raised garden beds in the backyard already, like really hitting on those things. Then it shows them that we were actively listening. And so I always tell them that, like, I want you to know, I hear what you are saying, but I would much rather you not miss something than us miss it. So when you are able to send them a hand selected one, it makes all the difference too, because then you really are showing them that you listened. And more so, this is important for any client. But it's incredibly important when it's a client that starts off hot and heavy, they think that they're ready in 2 or 3 months, AKA it's time to go ahead and start searching now. And then they take a pause and it ends up being a year or 2 later. And they say, all right, I'm ready to start again. And so you reset up the search, and then you later send them a hand selected listing with all of those little details. And granted, like the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, that's pretty standard criteria. But when we can really take copious notes on those little things, like, you know, I really want a fence, but I want it to be one of those privacy ones, not the black metal. I want it to be a corner lot if possible, backing up to trees. I really want to avoid a sloped driveway. My parents had one forever and it drove me crazy. Whatever, like write down all of those little tiny notes, because if it's 2 years later or a year later and you are able to find them one of those properties and then list all of those things that you're hitting on, what better way to make someone feel heard? And I think that's really what we're here for, is to make sure that clients know that we're not here for the sale, we're here to help them, and that we're not motivated by our own needs, but we're listening to their criteria. If we can peel the onion enough to know what those factors are, then that can help us a lot. So we might then say like, hey, I found this perfect house. It doesn't have a 4th bedroom, but it has a study downstairs and it has this additional flex space. I know you didn't really need it for like any family member that needed downstairs bedroom, but you could use it for X, Y, and Z, right? Like if we're able to point out specific things that we talked about with them, it really helps maintain that relationship, because in that amount of time, who knows if they've spoken to another agent, or who knows if they walked into some open house and ended up on someone's email list, right? Like we still have to actively work to keep our relationships with people. So that can go a long way. How are you guys setting people up on searches? And just out of curiosity, are you doing it on MLS or are you using KV Core? I would love to just kind of hear from you guys what your standard practice is and how you explain it to clients.
I think, Kate, it's Renew. I do KV Core for like long-term people that kind of have a bigger timeline.
Mhm.
And then the MLS, if it's like a hot lead and I'm working on it, like I've been clicking on places right now for someone, but I typically will use the active MLS if it's somebody that is actively looking, or it's somebody that's like asking me a lot of questions about what's coming up recently. Then use KV Core for those people that are a little bit of a colder lead.
That makes perfect sense. Mhm. Gives them a little time to nurture. It looks nice and fluffy, something that they're kind of used to seeing. But then obviously as we get more serious, want to make sure we're not missing things that aren't pushing out to third-party sites yet that we're doing MLS. That sounds perfect. What else? How do you guys do it? Anyone else want to share?
I just do MLS. In fact, I guess I would like to, look into the KV Core search more, but I just do MLS and I set it up right in front of them if we're in person. And I'll show them the results and say, what if it came back with 100 results? Okay, well, we probably need to narrow down your criteria a little bit, because this is a ton of properties.
Great point. Great point. Yes. And normally we'll know a little bit about them on the front end. So especially, I mean, obviously great practice regardless, but especially if it's someone that we know the criteria is just like, that's going to be a tight one, definitely do it in front of them, because we can fully understand what they're asking for, but it doesn't mean I can magically make inventory appear. So it's nice to narrow it down, but then also great for the opposite. If they're like, oh, this is what I want, and you type it all in and you just know there's no way. It's nice to kind of use that as your benchmark, let the system speak for you so that you're not the one saying bad news, you're kind of seeing it in front of them, but then we can kind of play around with those thresholds and see what would yield more results or the opposite. Great point. Thank you. I also like to make sure when I'm going through all of this, I like to make sure that they know the limitations of our search, like we talked about. I also like to make sure they understand that this is a two-way search. It is not my job to simply find you properties and send them to you all day. It is nice if I can, but my job is to get you to closing. And so I want you to be looking on your end as well. I'll be looking on my end. I'll look through MLS each day. You look through the listings that you're seeing, search on Zillow, whatever you're comfortable with. Feel free to send them my way and vice versa. and together we'll find you the property. I say that because I did have a situation where someone was like, well, it's your job to find me the house and I'm finding everything. Honey, you're finding them from my search. And also I have other things to do instead of sit in front of MLS all day. I saw one agent's post on Instagram the other day. I think Megan, are you on here? I don't see her right now. I thought Megan might have been on, but Megan made a post the other day that was just talking about like what I do as an agent. And one of the things that or like what I do and what I don't do. And one of the things that she said is like, I do a ton of stuff. I'm showing homes. I am going to inspections. I'm touring new construction to get the latest update on what the status is. And I'm working with a number of clients. And so I'm not sitting in front of my computer all day. Yes, I'm keeping an active eye on your search, but I won't be sitting on MLS to see that the second something comes active, I'm sending it your way. That's why we have the search set up, but just kind of setting that expectation with people. Most people, it's not an issue, but just reminding them that I want you to send me stuff as well. And then like we talked about, make sure you understand what their preferred communication method is, and what your hours are for responding. I think with text messages and things like that, it just all seems so urgent. And especially if they know you from the personal life, like they know you're a night owl, they know you forever, have your phone on you. If they text you at 9 o'clock and you don't respond, and then they see that you're active on Instagram, they're gonna be like, oh, the audacity. But like, I'm supposed to have some life, right? When is it always for you? So just setting those expectations with people and be like, this is when I'll respond to X, Y, and Z. This is how you request showings. Just set them up for success and set yourself up for success. And make sure they know it's all about them. Yeah. I will always give advice based on my own numbers, but it's up to you to decide. Make sure people know. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty much it. Anything else you guys want to touch on while we're in here? It can be related to something we went over or something we didn't at all. Mona, how does this compare? Oh, go
Does
ahead.
anybody pay for leads?
Ooh, great question.
No.
No, I know AJ and I had a conversation about this the other day. He's considering it.
I went ahead and signed up for it. I signed up. I don't even remember, everything last week was a blur. I think I got my first lead last night around 10 something, and I contacted them this morning.
With
Still
who?
stumbling.
Realtor.
Well, yeah, realtor.com. Yeah.
What is
So-
their deal?
Well,
much
I didn't get as good a deal as I thought I was gonna get. And plus I'm in a more rural area than where y'all were at. I picked up like 54 to 60 leads a year for $204. I didn't think that was terrible.
That's
And
not
$204 a month. So I mean, you close one deal, it'll pay for itself. So I don't know. Like I said, I got a buyer. I mean, I got a lead this morning, and as soon as I called him, he picked up the phone. So I'm gonna start that search. And when you were talking about doing KV Core versus MLS, I always do MLS because that's what I know. I don't really know a whole lot about setting people up on searches on KV Core. Don't really know a lot about KV Core. It's just sitting there for me.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I
Same
know
for me.
Allison Sanders also does realtor.com leads. I did a ton of Zillow leads when I was first getting over to Choice because I had done a lot of internet leads in my past brokerage. To AJ's point, there's very little availability kind of centrally. So a few things to keep in mind if you're looking at internet leads is just like, do they have availability in the area that you would want to be working in terms of buyers? Because if you have to drive far regularly and they're all going to be buyer leads, something to keep in mind. Does it feel sustainable? And what are the quality of those leads? Are there a ton of agents in this area? Like, what is the share that you're getting? So AJ lives out kind of up north of Durham by good ways. And so there aren't as many agents out that way. So he's able to get some good leads. But I will say when I did Zillow leads, which aren't even really a thing, they're more on a brokerage level these days. But when I was doing them, I would always buy it in what I thought was a first time buyer price point or first time buyer area that has a lot of lower price points because I was strong. I'm a little out of practice, but I've always been really strong at my buyer consultations. And so I would always take my internet leads, get in front of them. I told AJ when we were talking about this, I'm like, your entire first phone call is literally just to schedule an appointment for when they want to go see that house. Like, yes, I'm going to slightly ask if they're qualified. I'm going to make sure they're not working with an agent, because sometimes people want to like save their agent time and schedule showings. So I want to make sure they're not doing that. But other than that, I'm just trying to get in front of them. I'll show them that house and then I'll say, all right, let's talk about the process. Let's meet at my office tomorrow to go over it with you, and like give them a tiny rundown when we're in person, but then give them a full rundown at my office. And in my opinion, that was always how I like really proved value and built trust, was because they were first time buyers who hadn't been through the process before. And by me explaining it in a buyer consult, I felt like I could like really prove the value and start that relationship, and then kind of go from there. And especially if I'm not the first agent they've met with, like, especially if they've seen a house or two and someone might have mentioned something but barely explained it, like that will speak a ton, you know, if no one else has kind of mentioned that process. Why do you ask specifically, Judy? You just exploring it in general?
No, I just am curious because, especially I'm out in Charlotte now. So I don't know a lot of people to get referrals out here. But I don't know. I've just always been curious how many people were doing that. So are there very many people in our office that are paying for leads?
Not many. I think there's a few, but I can get you into contact with them and just kind of let you pick their brain about it, because that's a valid point. I think it's all about, I mean, I know I've said it a million times, but it's all about just putting yourself in situations to meet people, which is a lot easier said than done. It takes time. I'm
Yeah.
excited about your new area though.
Yeah. Yeah.
With
Thanks.
my limited experience with Realtor, what I came across is many of the prospects have not been pre-qualified yet, and they're kind of window shopping. So just kind to still have that conversation and you to try to determine the seriousness of and their sense of urgency. Is it, if it's going to be 6 months, okay, it's fine, 6 months, but kind of, as you probably already know, just try to help them set the expectation and understand that they need to know how much they can actually buy. So I know that's been my limited experience with Realtor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So probably 1 out of, I don't know, probably pretty low ratio is, you know, going to pan out to be, you know, actually able to put in an offer and go through with going under contract.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that we have to just remind ourselves of is that it's, when we think of internet leads, we so often think that it's going to be a quick fix to our business in terms of a lead that's ready to buy tomorrow. And yes, occasionally you do have those fall out of the sky that are ready, willing, and financially able to make that happen. But most of the time, even with internet leads, to your point, Jackie, it's kind of a foot in the door and shopping casually. And then they start getting in front of people and they're like, oh, I'm just starting, you know? So recognizing that if you're going to be paying for internet leads, I had this conversation with AJ the other day when we were talking about him starting his, is you can do all of that, but you have to be very designated about creating a system in your business to follow up with these people on a regular basis. Like you have to be using your CRM, or you have to be using a spreadsheet of some sort, whatever system works for you, make one and continue to follow up, because otherwise you're just throwing money out the door. Like it is, occasionally you'll get one that's an instant A and you'll instantly be shopping with them. But even if they're just a B or C, if you start, you know, it can be fine and dandy when you're first starting to fill your pipeline with them. But after your 30th lead, you've totally forgotten about the first one that you got that needed 8 months to get qualified minimum. And then, you know, that time comes and goes and we don't have our system in place. We're not following up with them. And then they end up working with another agent. And that was that money out the door. So that's the hardest part, is just recognizing like you can do it, but it isn't always instant. And if we don't make our systems, it won't help us in the long run either. But
Yeah.
I say all of that, like I built my entire business off of it. So it obviously can be done, and I'm not hating on it at all. Just
You built your business off starting with Zillow.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
But now they changed their whole,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I mean, the tricky part with any of those also is that you have contracts for 6 months minimum. And it's normally, I mean, AJ and I were talking about that 250, or when we were talking, it was 250. So even closer to 200, not bad at all for a price. But most of the time it's gonna be like 500 or 800 minimum. And if you're locking into that for 6 months, you're gonna want to see some results. So it can be intimidating to get started because it's such a time commitment financially as well.
yeah. And I've heard of people getting hooked up with relocation companies, but I don't know how you do that, who that's
Yeah.
through.
I don't necessarily know who you contact to get in the loop with that, but I will say that I think a lot of relocation companies tend to give buyer credits. And that's just such a slippery slope of like, if you want to be a part of that process, are they going to expect you to give some sort of consideration to the buyer at closing, which like here and there is fine. But if that's how you're building your business and then you get referral clients that are then expecting some sort of reimbursement, it's just, you aren't free. So it's hard to discount your services.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, a percentage of something is better than a percentage of nothing by all means. So I'll look into that. But see. How did your conversation with them go, AJ? I know you said that once you had kind of raised your hand, they were relentless, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a complete bust, but like I said, I think they're window shopping. But I mean, I think they're in the process of getting pre-approval. The way he talked, he was waiting on some kind of documentation or something. He said, I feel like it could be a good lead because he did say he is a like a home improvements guy is what he does for a living. So I feel like it might be a long term to find him somewhere because he's looking for something that he can do some renovations to that needs some work. I actually got to looking on the MLS and I stumbled upon something, but he's making it a little hard on me because he does want a basement. But the one that I found actually does have a basement. So I'm gonna send that to him. Maybe I can get in front of him and show him. And the problem that I have though is I don't have an office up this way to be able to sit down and have this conversation with these people. And I'm up here in a small town, and it ain't like we can sit down at a Starbucks. I don't even think they have any coffee spots up here really.
Well, then, I'm going to be in the same boat, but I think that I would find a house that they're interested in and just do a consultation there.
yeah.
And that's what I was thinking, just once I get them there and do the consultation. Because like I said, it's a small town, and I mean, the county butts up to the Virginia state line. So it's nothing really up this way. It hasn't grown. They got to get some people out of some of the older people generation that's that's running the city. They got to get them out so they can bring some growth to the city up here. But I mean, I feel like it could be a possible, but like the way I look at it is even if they are window shopping, that's one more contact that I have made with somebody that could potentially be a sale. I try to look at it on the bright side of things, not that it could be a complete.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a process. I've done plenty of them in houses. I mean, with Zillow leads and stuff, half the battle is just getting in front of them the first time. And what I told AJ is just to make sure I've said it. Like, if you're doing internet leads after that first appointment, do not leave your appointment without setting a second appointment. Like, if at all possible, you have to just set the second appointment when you're in front of them. Be like, awesome. I know we've kind of gone over inventory. There's nothing that's come up, but why don't we just tentatively make a plan to meet together on this coming Friday? I know houses tend to come up on Thursday and Friday in preparation for the weekend. So I know we don't see anything right now, but let's just go ahead and proactively set it on our calendar so we can be on the same page. And I've got time set aside for you. And then, we can coordinate as things come up to see which house you want to go see. Or go ahead and pick one, whatever the case may be. But keeping in front of those people is a big part of it.
So I got a question. When would you put them up under buyer agency agreement?
It totally depends on the person. And I'm so bad about this, honestly. with internet leads, it's a delicate dance because you want to make sure they're not wasting your time and you want to make sure that it's a mutual commitment, but you also don't want to scare them off and be like, all right, we're signing buyer agency right now, but you know that they're actively clicking on things, you know? So I would wait until the second or third appointment, but just preface it, you know, when you're going over in your second appointment, you've brought all this with you, you know, first appointment, maybe you didn't bring it, second appointment, bring your buyer packet with you, and just say, hey, we're going to go over this process. And when you pull out your packet and you're showing them the contracts and you're showing them buyer agency, and be like, okay, so our first step from here is to start getting your file organized. That means I'm going to need a pre-approval from you. And that means we're going to go ahead and get buyer agency and working with real estate agents signed. I'm going to send that over to you this evening. What's your best email address? And you likely already have it, you know, but I would just kind of use it as like, this is our next step. I'm getting your file organized. You send me your pre-approval, I'll send you this. But I would go ahead and do it pretty quickly. Now, but it depends on their timeline. If they're a year out, I mean, you could have them sign it, but I just don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Jackie, Judy?
I think
Rhoda?
if I show them once, go out with them for a day, then after that, if they want to go again, or they are serious, I have them sign buyer's agency agreement.
That's true. Make yourself exclusive. This is what I require of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I might give them a couple times, especially if I went out with them for a day. It kind of depends on the number of properties and just the amount of time I've invested. So I might give them, if it's just we went out and saw one property one day, I might, you know, do it up to 3 times if it's just one property at a time. And then at the third one, I would say, okay, so if we're going to keep, you know, you've gotten to know each other enough, you know, you should know whether you want to work with me or not. And I'd love to work with you. So, you know, this week, I kind of refer to this, and this buyer agency agreement is just a loyalty agreement. And, you know, it's, you know, it's just that, you know, lets us know that, you know, we are good with working with each other and sets that expectation. That's all. So I guess it just depends on the total number of hours that I'm investing.
Yeah, that was a beautiful way to put it. Loyalty agreement, especially with internet leads. Yeah. Okay. Just make it a part of your process, make it the required next step. In your professional, I mean, scarcity creates value. So are they going to rise to the occasion? All of my other clients are doing this. This is who, you know, the people I work with, this is our next step. You ready? I'm going to send it over. Let me know if you have questions when you get it. Like, you're not asking as much of a question. Great thought. Anything else, you guys? Let me know if you ever want to sit down and do a practice consultation. I know it sounds cheesy, but I'm a big believer in them. It just makes it a lot easier when you're talking in front of clients if you've said it a few times, or just practice it in your car.
I do have one question. You know, you were sitting here and you basically, I know that this is a class and you went over everything. Does it normally take you about an hour to go over your whole packet with the client?
Yeah, it does. It normally takes about an hour. Now, granted, if we are in a home and I'm just doing it at the kitchen table, this can take 5 to 15 minutes. Like, I can skip to the brief stuff and just be like, the things you need to know are purchase price, due diligence, and earnest money. Let's talk about this process, and mainly just spend time talking about due diligence and what's at risk. Like, that is my main thing. I just don't ever want anyone to come to me and say, I didn't know. No, I'm going to make it very clear that this is the contract. This is how it works in North Carolina. This is what is at risk. It is up to you to decide. This is how we can kind of gauge how protected we feel those funds are. If everything's been replaced, we feel a lot more confident in it. We can make a higher due diligence amount. I don't think I scripted this well, but when I'm going over the 3 main things, I'll say purchase price is our number 1 term. Due diligence really and truly is neck and neck with that. That is our second most competitive term. It is top notch to the seller because it shows our commitment. It shows how willing we might or might not be from walking away. The higher that number, the less likely we are to walk away in seller's eyes, and probably in ours too. So what is that threshold for us, and how confident do we feel? Kind of explaining that to them. So, I mean, it can be very fast if needed, but in general, if I'm sitting down with someone, yes, it's about an hour.
And I also refer to the due diligence as a non-refundable deposit. So it is a deposit. If you goes through and you go to closing, it's credited, but it goes immediately. You're writing it out to the person, to the seller. It's non-refundable deposit.
Right. And making sure they know about those deposits being cashed right away. Like we don't have until closing to save that money. It's if we are writing our offer, we need to have those funds in our account also. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and quick question. You said that there's choice folders. If I wanted to order some, is that on our little intranet thing?
Yeah. I was trying, let me see if I have any in my backpack. I don't have any with me. I don't know if there's a way to do it on the intranet. You can definitely just email Kelly or Brian though. I think they're like $4 a folder, 2 or 4. I don't know, something like that. But he has them in his office. So if you just email Kelly or Brian and tell them, I want to pick up a few folders, they'll just add it to your agent bill.
Yeah, but I'm not in Raleigh anymore.
Oh, true. Oh my gosh. Hello. Sorry. They can mail it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they can mail it to you.
I'll just ask Kelly. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, thanks for this today. Appreciate
Of course, y'all. Of course. If you think of anything else or you want to do anything offline, just holler at me. We'll schedule a time for us to chat offline. Whoever. Thanks for your time today, y'all. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's your week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.